In this issue, we're bringing you back to Jersey to catch up with Greg Hildebrandt. So hang on, because Heroes, Villains, and Artists starts now.
My name is Greg Hildebrandt, and I'm an artist. At 5 years old, we saw Disney's Pinocchio. That kind of like was this huge wallop that I didn't know what the hell was going on up there on the screen, but I wanted to do that. So did Tim. In the 40s, all the kids, you didn't have television, so your parents, would drop you off, or you'd walk to the movie theater with a packed lunch, and you spend the day in the movies. And then it was the comic strips, first of all, because that's what's coming in the front door. The newspapers are coming in every day. So we're growing up in the 1940s, remember. I was born in 1939, so we're seeing all the golden era stuff of Hal Foster's Prince Valiant and Alex Raymond's Jungle Jim, and every other kid on the block that I grew up in that drew copied this stuff. This is you're getting this stuff and copying it every day. So the comic strips in Disney, and then it's comic books. And I'm starting to buy comic books probably at 7 years old, maybe. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and then when I moved into the EC period, I went crazy over all the Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror and Weird Science and everything. So it's kind of like coming from all over the place. At a certain point, I tell Jean, my business manager agent, I said, Jean, I want to get into comics. She called Stan Lee. Stan says, well, look, I'm not in the comic division. I'm getting films off the ground, but here's the guy to call. I went in there with the whole expectation I was going to have to prove myself. I was fully intending to do it by showing that I can get into this whole idiom, and I want to get into this idiom, and I'll do whatever you need me to do. You want me to sweep the floors right now? I didn't give it, you know what I mean? That's what I wanted to do. And he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I don't know. Well, I don't know, anything, whatever you want. So he let me think about it. So, I don't know, a week or so goes by, and he calls, and he said, oh, how about a Marvel Masterpieces, painted card set? And I said, sounds good to me. And at that time, now Tim and I hadn't worked together for a long time, for about 8, 9, 10 years. We had gone our separate ways. So then we started getting back together again on some projects, and I said, this would be the first one, really big one. And I said, Tim, how about this? You want to get in on this thing? He said, yeah. So the both of us kind of came together. Bob Budiansky was the editor, particularly on this particular whole project. So it was a fun process for me because I was getting an education. Bob was really good at, pushing me with my sketches, get a little more, this, more of this stuff, coming at you and everything. So I'm, because it's a whole different mindset, even though you grew up on this stuff, and obviously in the 40s and 50s, it had nowhere near the dynamic aspects of drawing and pow in your face kind of like thing as the later stuff did, by the 90s. So I'm pushing the drawings further and further and further with the whole concept that when you think you've gone as extreme as you can go further with it, that kind of idea. And it's also really great, the idiom, I thought, for pushing color and contrast as far as you could go. Even though Tim and I experimented with color on all of our lives in terms of high chroma, I think with this stuff, gave you the springboard to really leap into intense color contrast and chroma, high level of chroma, intense color. From the beginning of the paintings to the end of the paintings was 6 months. We painted 155 paintings in 6 months. But that kind of I think it added something to it. Rather, as opposed to sitting and noodling and tickling on a thing for 3 or 4 days, The fact that you're batting them out one a day, and it kind of fits into the whole comic world of how fast stuff has to be done, So that was a kick. The adrenaline was really rushing. I grew up on Terry and the Pirates, obviously in the 40s in the strip, and Mil Kniff was one of the gods to all of us guys who drew. He still is, as far as I'm concerned. His drawing, his storytelling, is fantastic. And Michael Uslan, who was executive film producer of Batman, had the idea of bringing back the comic strip, so he contacted Tribune Media. Now, I don't know any of this stuff. This is all going on behind my back with Michael and Gene. And so they apparently arrive at, Gene, Michael, and Tribune Media arrive at, well, Tim and Greg are going to do Tearing the Pirates, you know? And so Gene opens the door up. Guess what you're doing next? Into my studio. To Tim and me, we're both sitting there. What? Tearing the Pirates, comic strip, daily and Sunday. And then she closes the door, and Tim and I both freak out. We're just kind of like, it's just impossible, blah, blah, blah. You know, like out of terror of following in God's footsteps. And, well, we do paint, we don't do ink. This is black and white, and just 365 days of artwork, and realistic artwork, right? Again, not you know, and so you go nuts, and you're terrified. I was terrified and panic-stricken. And yet, running parallel with that, of course, is the extreme turn-on and excitement. So they just kind of like both go together. After, I don't know, a week or 2 or 3 or 4 of the terror turns into excitement, you know? It just gets turned into a real big turn-on. And we're racing like crazy. We're working 14 hours a day probably at this point, now Tim and I together. And it was an exciting process. It was incredible. I wanted it to go on for at least 3 years. It only went on for a year. But I could have done that for a number of years. That was another whole thing that I wanted to do. That was one of those things that I started looking at art like that when I was a kid. You know, oh, come on, all kids do, all guys do. And I started to talk to Gene about it again. Gene, I want to do pinups now. Well, I don't know anything about that area. That's a whole. I said, well, okay. So she starts to research it, and you know, doing her due diligence and finding out about it. And she finds that, well, the man in this field is Lou Meisel in New York City, in Soho. He's got a gallery called the Great American Pinup, and he's also put out several books on pinup art of all the old masters. So I had a bunch of them that I was developing in sketch form already, and then made an appointment with Lou, and Gene and I went into New York and to show him live the paintings and set them all up, and that was sweat and blood. Because there on the walls, there's all Elfgren and Vargas and Petty and Mozart and all these people. I'm saying, oh my God, look at that. There's all the, and here I'm setting my, you know, and so Lou's down there with you know, eyeballing them real close, and I'm sweating out, don't get so close, you know what I mean? Stay over here and look at, you know, I was like that. And his wife Susan comes through. She works with him. She just kind of passes by. She's got to give her eyeball on, give her approval. And he says, Susan likes them. So then, you know, it passed approval, you know, and he said, okay, you got to show. And well, when? 2 years or something? And Gene said, no, we want it this year. And he says, well, you've only got 4 paintings. We had at least 20-something paintings for the show. He said, well, Greg will do them. So I said, okay. And went home and started coming up with 20 more paintings. And I sketched them all out, all the ideas, got all the models, shot all the pictures, painted them, and Lou gave me that first show, which more or less kind of like put me on the map as now I'm a bona fide pinup painter, you know, which, see, I love jumping out of categories. I don't want to be pigeonholed. I don't like to be, you know, oh yeah, you're good at fantasy dwarfs and elves, you know what I mean? And therefore you got to stay there and do that for the rest of your life. I'm not saying that that's something that there's anything wrong with that. There are a lot of guys and a lot of artists that just stay with one thing and they do that one thing for their whole life, and that's fantastic. And I just don't have that desire to want to just do one thing forever, you know? It's like there's too many things to do. That's the way I feel. There's just too much stuff to explore. The best part of the job is the blank piece of paper or board or whatever you're drawing on, because that's where there's infinite possibility. That's like anything can happen now, you know? So that the anticipation is always the best part of the job for me. That's always the best part.
And remember, to get your hands on some of Greg's work, or for more information, make sure you check out his website. Till next time, sayonara.